Let's talk today about what happens if you sit down every day.
I don't know if you have considered this question. It's how much time you spend sitting every day, although it varies from person to person.
After all, we have to sit and work. Sitting in a meeting,
Sitting in class, sit and eat,
sit and watch TV, sitting and playing games,
sitting and reading, sitting and doing homework,
sitting in a daze, sitting on the toilet. I also sit down when driving by plane.
take the tram.
So sit, definitely can say.
It is the normal life of most people now. I might be more serious.
If you calculate it this way, the time I stand every day,
Probably less than 2 hours. I don't know how long everyone has.
in September 2020, International Society for Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity,
In their official magazine, published a global report titled Research Report on Scope Review of Monitoring of Sitting Practices.
they collect 29% of the world's countries and regions. That is, 62 countries and regions. 10 years of national sitting time data.
Why did he only collect? What about data for less than 30% of countries and regions?
Because of data on sitting time are not available in most countries. That is to say, most countries, these data have not been collected at all. Just these 62 countries and regions. Very responsible for counting people's sitting time. However, this research report also said,
Although these 62 countries only account for 29%.
but the population,
But it's 47% of the world's. So this data, it still has some reference value. And 38 of these 62 countries are high-income countries.
that is to say, it can be seen.
High-income countries are relatively.
Then it analyzed the data of these 62 countries and found that, of all countries, median average daily sitting time, it's 4.7 hours.
But what about people from different countries and regions? There is a significant difference in their average sitting time.
People from high-income countries usually spend more time sitting than people in low-income countries.
Relative to low-income countries,
Average sitting time per day is 2.7 hours.
sitting time in high-income countries,
It's 5 hours a day, nearly double.
report says,
Maybe it's because high-income countries,
a relatively high proportion of the population is engaged in sitting industries.
with the development of economy,
As for the profession, it gradually became a sitting one. For example, a greater proportion of jobs are in service industries, rather than traditional manufacturing and agriculture. Manufacturing and agriculture are generally done standing. The more developed a country is, the more progress it makes.
the longer you sit, the longer it takes. Of course, there are some countries, is the underlying social and cultural custom, causing them to sit for longer periods of time.
For example, the Middle East.
The University of Sydney in 2011, in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine,
Published an article describing the epidemiology of sitting postures using the International Physical Activity Questionnaire.
comparison of 20 countries, the research report. For 20 countries and regions around the world from 2002 to 2004,
Adults 18 to 65 years old.
49,493 respondents. Average daily sitting time was analyzed and compared. Median time spent sitting is 5 hours per day.
The country with the least amount of sitting time is Portugal.
Brazil, Colombia.
Daily sitting time, less than 3 hours. Countries and regions where people sit for longer periods of time, including Taiwan, Hong Kong, Norway, Saudi Arabia, and Japan.
The one with the longest sitting posture is Japan.
On average, it reaches more than 7 hours a day.
From a conclusion, the longer you sit, the mortality rate will be higher.
For example, Japan is a country with a relatively long life expectancy, but its long life expectancy is due to medical advances, or the environment is better,
On the contrary, this sitting posture,
causing them not to be that long. If there is no problem with sitting posture, he may be longer. Then 2020, the World Health Organization published a research report.
says research findings based on data from 1 million participants. Sitting for long periods of time increases all-cause mortality.
In particular,
Mortality from cardiovascular disease and cancer disease.
will significantly increase.
The longer you sit, the mortality rate will increase faster.
In particular, when the sitting time reaches 9-10 hours a day, mortality rate will increase by leaps and bounds. For example, whether you are doing it for work or study, if you do it for more than 8 hours a day, it's easy for you to get close to this, at such a time when the death rate rises sharply. Then this research report also pointed out that
links between prolonged sitting and specific diseases.
For example, prolonged sitting and all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease mortality, cancer mortality. There is a moderately certain relationship with the incidence of type 2 diabetes.
This doesn't mean it's possible, it's certain.
So according to this study, the World Health Organization emphasized
the importance of limiting sedentary behavior.
Come to a conclusion.
Reduce sedentary time and increase physical activity. To reduce all-cause mortality and disease-specific risks are critical, so globally recognized.
State-of-the-art Cancer Prevention Education and Research Institute,
University of Texas, MD Anderson Cancer Research Center,
published a research report in 2020,
pointed out that they gave 8,000 people over the age of 45,
people who have not had cancer wear accelerators,
track their sitting time. This investigation was conducted for 5 years.
268 people died from cancer.
By analyzing everyone's acceleration data, discover
the most sedentary group compared with the least sedentary group, 82% high risk of cancer death. It is said that the longer you sit, the more likely you are to get cancer.
In fact, cancer is the result of a combination of factors. This is just one of the reasons.
But if you can reduce a certain amount of sitting time and increase the same amount of physical exercise,
can significantly reduce risk of cancer death. For example, 30 minutes of light physical activity every day. If you walk instead of sitting,
can reduce cancer risk by 8%.
And if you switch to moderate activities,
like riding a bike or something like that, this cancer risk can be reduced by 31%. So if you use physical exercise instead of sitting,
can significantly reduce cancer. Also found,
sitting for long periods of time can increase blood pressure. Blood flow slows down. Increased risk of heart disease and cerebral infarction. 2019.
Research team from Kansas State University, USA. A study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association states,
if a person remains seated for 3 hours,
human arteries will harden. Elasticity reduced by 50%.
There is a very thick artery in the human thigh. Sitting for a long time will compress this artery.
Let the artery wall harden.
Lose elasticity, eventually leading to high blood pressure and insufficient blood flow.
What about high blood pressure?
Can cause heart disease and stroke,
kidney disease and vision problems.
Why high blood pressure causes vision problems? It's because our retinas, many very fragile blood vessels. If your blood pressure is high, these blood vessels will break.
Your eyes will be damaged.
There is another big problem.
Will cause cerebral infarction.
Hypertension itself can cause cerebrovascular rupture, and insufficient blood flow causes brain cell necrosis.
Will cause severe cerebral infarction. Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine 2021. Targeting 143,000 people in Canada.
A 9.4-year follow-up survey analysis found that people who sit for more than 8 hours a day and people who sit for no more than 4 hours a day,
in comparison, incidence of cerebral infarction, it is 7 times higher than sitting and is more likely to cause heart disease,
prone to cerebral infarction,
prone to cancer.
Sitting for long periods of time is a big problem. It means energy consumption is reduced.
You may not know,
70% of the human body's muscle tissue is concentrated in the lower body.
So the amount of energy a person consumes through exercise every day, most of the drug is consumed through the lower body. While sitting,
lower body does not move. No matter how you move your upper body, you can't consume so much energy. Then this energy consumption is reduced.
Can lead to diabetes and obesity. It doesn't cause diabetes because you don't move, caused by eating too much. That is, if a person keeps his body motionless for a long time,
the body's response to insulin will weaken.
Insulin
is an important hormone that regulates sugar levels in the body. After decreased insulin sensitivity,
This can lead to problems with blood sugar control levels,
thereby increasing the risk of type 2 diabetes. There is also
people in a state of hunger,
to stimulate the self-eating function of cells,
eliminate waste, harmful cells, and even cancer cells from the body,
and sedentary,
unable to consume energy,
will cause us to spend even 16 hours a day.
Eat nothing, won't be hungry either.
If you keep sitting,
if you are not hungry, the self-feeding function will not activate. Can't reduce cancer risk.
Finally, let's talk about it.
What's the problem with sitting for a long time?
It causes depression. This is actually related to our body's autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system.
It is to control various passive skills of our body. Such a nervous system.
You will recognize that you are awake, still sleeping,
and then control these functions. Secrete hormones.
Should this function be active? So it will be the key to determining whether you are awake or not.
How does it judge?
The first aspect is based on the biological clock. It just has its own rules. But now people's biological clocks are a little inaccurate.
If your living habits are not very good,
this biological clock is even more chaotic.
This judgment standard becomes invalid. The second criterion is the surrounding light environment. That's when he discovered there was light.
It will think
it's daytime and you should wake up.
All kinds of functions revived with him. But we now live in an environment where light is available 24 hours a day.
This judgment standard is also invalid.
And its final criterion. It's just that your body can't move.
If the body does not move, he will feel. You need to rest. So skills in all aspects began to decline. Use some functions that promote your sleep to wake you up.
So the reason why people get sleepy after sitting for a long time is,
it's because your body thinks you need to rest. But actually we are working when we sit. In this case,
will occur
the conflict between your subjective consciousness and subconscious mind.
Subconsciously thinks you need to rest,
and the subjective consciousness wants to wake up.
This contradiction between subconsciousness and subjective consciousness,
over time, it will cause anxiety.
You will feel particularly uncomfortable every day, inexplicably depressed.
Will drink coffee desperately. This can ultimately lead to anxiety or even depression.
So sitting all the time will cause depression.
On the other hand,
if you don't want to be depressed,
you should stand up and take a walk. It will be much better, that's all.
Just sitting can cause all kinds of problems.
Of course, there are other problems besides.
For example, it causes cervical spondylosis, scoliosis, and other issues. This is a trivial matter.
So since there are so many problems after sitting down,
how can we improve this problem? Actually, there is only one solution.
Just reduce sitting time.
We mentioned at the beginning
the world's most authoritative Anderson Cancer Research Center.
Its report is submitted.
If you can reduce the time you spend sitting
and increase the same time,
light and moderate exercise time can significantly reduce the risk of cancer.
The World Health Organization also noticed long ago, sitting for long periods of time can cause many problems.
So they came up with a physical activity and sedentary guidelines for conduct.
So according to this guide, children and adolescents aged 5 to 17 years
do it for at least 60 minutes every day. Moderate or vigorous physical activity. Engage in high-intensity aerobic exercise at least 3 days a week. And activities that strengthen muscles and bones. What is moderate intensity aerobic exercise? Just during exercise, you can feel your heartbeat speeding up obviously.
But I can still speak normally.
Called moderate intensity.
Such as brisk walking and normal cycling. And high-intensity aerobic exercise. It is when the heartbeat speeds up significantly during exercise.
Speaking becomes difficult, such as running, fast cycling and swimming, etc.
Adults 18 to 64 years old
should be performed for at least 150 to 300 minutes per week. Moderate intensity aerobic physical activity, or
at least 75 to 150 minutes of high-intensity aerobics.
Physical activity. Just walk for 25 to 45 minutes every day.
Or a 15 to 25 minute run.
In terms of steps, that means walking at least 6,000 steps a day. This is WHO World Health Organization.
Standards given. Japan, the longevity country.
Information disclosed by the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare says people should stay healthy thoroughly.
Walk at least 8,000 steps a day. So people over 65 years old.
His activity requirements.
In fact, there is not much difference from those between 18 and 64 years old.
It's just that it doesn't emphasize muscle training.
It's more about balance training. The advice for chronically ill patients and adults aged 18 to 64 is,
you cannot reduce this exercise even if you have a chronic disease.
And pregnant women.
This amount of exercise can be halved.
The World Health Organization particularly emphasizes this.
Is the best amount of exercise. Is an intermediate value.
Not the minimum.
Not the maximum value.
Everyone can decide according to their own situation to adjust the amount of exercise. But the more exercise, the bigger the health data,
the more mortality is reduced.
The increase in the amount of exercise should be gradual to avoid sports injuries.
There is another thing that everyone must pay attention to.
That's all the exercise time we're talking about here.
It's not that you need to do these exercises every day.
It's the amount of exercise time you have to trade for sitting.
What's the meaning? That is,
it doesn't mean that you can exercise for 45 minutes every day.
But you have to reduce your sitting posture by 45 minutes at the same time.
Add 45 minutes of exercise time.
The premise is that you must first reduce the time you spend sitting.
Otherwise, no matter how much you exercise,
the mortality rate will not be reduced.
2021 Kyoto Welfare University School of Medicine
published a research report saying,
based on 60,000 Japanese,
average 7.7 years of follow-up data analysis, it was found that the longer the sitting position, the higher the risk of death. And this connection,
hypertensive lipid dyslipidemia,
most obvious among patients with diabetes.
The most important thing is,
the study found, even if you increase your physical activity the rest of the time, it cannot be completely suppressed. Risk of death due to prolonged sitting,
and high blood pressure and diabetes.
Many are inherited in families. So, if you really want to reduce your risk of death,
the first thing is not to increase the amount of exercise.
Instead, reduce sitting time.
There are many elites now.
They work long hours too.
Then when you get off work, still working out hard,
it doesn't actually reduce your risk of death.
If there is nothing you can do to reduce your sitting time, how can you lower your mortality rate?
Just say you stand up for 1 second every 30 minutes. Can reduce mortality. On the one hand, it helps to clear your blood. The problem of high blood pressure has been solved.
Secondly, it sends a signal to the central nervous system of the body. Autonomic nervous system signal. I'm awake, I am not sleeping.
Reduce the risk of depression. Just stand up for a moment.
Of course, it will be difficult to drive.
It's difficult for you to stand up.
Or you can consider stopping first.
Go out and stand up.
Or you can go to the toilet.
Of course, if you stand up,
you can also do some other exercises.
That's better. Can you cooperate with some cleaning, cooking and washing dishes?
Something within my power.
It can all be counted within your 45 minutes. If you can't even do this, just stand up for 1 second in these 30 minutes. If you can't do it, just shake your legs.
Shaking your legs can also remind you that you are not sleeping,
not resting, and you can also decongest these areas.
Lie down for 30 minutes.
Stand up. In summary, that is to say,
although sitting is the norm in our lives now, but it's actually a very scary thing.
You only need to sit for 1 minute longer.
May increase the risk of death.
So,
everyone should reduce the time they spend sitting as much as possible.
Stand up whenever you get the chance. Even if you just stand for a second.
That also reduces the risk of death.
A good way. The mortality rate we are talking about now. Just one aspect, increase in mortality.
There may also be a combination of various factors that produce.
This is how the world is now. This is how we live. Really just sitting most of the time.
Because sitting can keep you awake, can work again, and a posture that consumes the least energy.
It's a very efficient gesture.
But it's actually not good for your health.